Hey everyone, Noam here. In case you missed it, Unpacking Israeli History is coming to Chicago on June 8th for our first ever live show, and I am so thrilled to finally announce our very special guest, and it is Dr. Michael Oren, best-selling author, historian, and politician, and his book on the Six-Day War in 1967 was so important. It has inspired me, it has educated me. I have learned so much from it, and I'm so excited to talk to him about that book and about Israeli history in general. We will be unpacking some of the most pressing questions around Israeli history, around Israeli identity and the future together on stage live. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. I want to see you all there. Grab your tickets now with the link in the show notes, or just go straight to Ticketmaster.com. Just search Unpacking Israeli History. And if you use the discount code UIHCHI, you can get 20% off your tickets. I'll say it one more time. Use the coupon code UIHCHI. And if you're not in Chicago, don't you worry. We got you. We're visiting a few other cities this year, so stay tuned. Chicago, Yalla. Let's do this.
This is just a pure symbol of hate that's always been a symbol of hate. Why is it on a church? From Unpacked, this is Jewish History Nerds, the podcast where we nerd out on awesome stories in Jewish history. I'm Jonathan Schwab.
And I'm Yael Steiner. And for, sadly, the last time in season 4, I get to learn something from Schwab today.
Yes.
This is
not our last episode, right? We have one more
episode this season. But this is the penultimate.
Yes.
Given our word list for the season, I'll just throw that out there. This is the penultimate episode of season 4, and I'm excited to hear what you've got.
This is a very interesting story. I'm not sure that I would use the word excited for myself. I think I'm kind of sad that this is the episode that I'm getting to end this season on. I think it's just a very upsetting topic.
I'm getting an apprehensive vibe from you.
I'm apprehensive about this because what I'm struggling with, and maybe we'll come to it in the conversation, is just like what I think we've managed to end on a positive note in many of the episodes and realize like a long history of these symbols, but there's like a modern history that often involves like reclaiming them.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't think that happens here.
Okay.
So I'll say the two like content warnings at the top is one, this story does not have, I think, a happy ending in any way. And a very important part of this story that we're going to definitely get a lot into is this is a pretty obscene topic. So if I think that my kids are the only kids who listen to the show, but this is not going to be the most kid-friendly episode.
When you say obscene, do you mean that the imagery we're going to be talking about is obscene? Do you mean that we're going to be using obscene words?
So what we're talking about today is the Judensau, which is, I assume, not something you're familiar with.
No, never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Yeah, which neither did I before started researching this episode. But it's not one object. More properly, I think we can describe it as like a motif of things, like many things made in this style. In Germany, it's German for Jew pig. Zau is like the English word sow, a female pig.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it is a female pig specifically. And the motif, which we'll talk about, changes somewhat over time and is used in a lot of different ways, is that of a pig and Jews in very obscene contact with the pig. And this is the part where I'm just like, okay, I feel like I have to spell it out rather than like leave it unsaid. Obscene contact. In some cases, the Jews are suckling, like they're, drinking the milk from the teats of the pig. But in some cases, they're riding the pig, which I guess is not as bad as the other, but also definitely seems like there's fornication, possibly
so
some sort
bad,
of
any kind of contact between human and pig here is not positive.
Not positive, and very deliberately so. Like these are made to show that, like we'll get to, Jews are really gross and pigs are really gross, and Jews are doing gross things with pigs.
I mean, obviously, we talk about pigs just from a pure, like, they live in sties, they play in the mud, they are considered to be very...
Pigs are just gross, right? When you're someone, I don't know, eats in a disgusting manner, you might say, oh, they're pigging out, right? Like there's just, we have this association.
This apartment is a pigsty, hypothetically.
Yes. Yeah. And that's not new. That is a long association that pigs, I don't know, love to roll around in filth.
And I have no idea if that's like biological, if there are pigs who grow up in different atmospheres and who don't do that. Yeah. But is it that Jews are physically dirty and therefore we associate them with pigs? Or is it that the pig as something that is off limits to Jews from a kashrut standpoint? Even though there are a lot of things that aren't kosher for whatever reason in the vernacular of anti-Semitism, and not even anti-Semitism, just any conversation about Jews, like pork, pig, ham, bacon is the first thing that people go to when they think of treif, things that Jews cannot partake of.
Like high level thing that they know, Jews don't eat pig.
Right.
And it's a very interesting sort of strange aspect to this of like, why show Jews in contact with pigs when that's like the one thing they cannot have that everybody knows?
Well, to me, that could be the motivation.
Yes, and that is one of the theories. So let's get a little into like, what's the history? These symbols are so old and have changed a little bit over time. And we don't have a record of like, was it that the pig was like a deliberate poke, to Jews? Like, here's this thing we know you can't have and we're showing you this way. Or whoever we're making this, like, weren't even aware of or didn't even intend any connection to that. The oldest, we're mostly going to talk about sculpted things, reliefs, like parts, parts of buildings, because those are the ones that have survived. But these existed in a variety of forms in Germany and were popular for several hundred years at least. The earliest ones that we can date go back to the early 1200s.
So this is beyond just a propaganda poster or a political cartoon. We have actually sculpted the denigration of Jews into our architectural structures.
Yes, and not just architectural structures, but specifically, in the vast majority of cases, churches.
Okay.
Again, those are the ones that have predominantly survived. It's very possible that they were included in lots of other places, but the churches are the ones where they've been preserved.
How far back are we talking?
So the earliest ones that we have, which are somewhat understand, like they're not in the best condition, but as far back as the 1200s. So there's a church in Brandenburg that we can date this specific design on one of its columns or something to 1230. So like 800 years old and still there, which we'll get to at the end, the still there element of all of this. That's a very old one. And like I said, they changed a little bit over time. But like that one there, Brandenburg, it shows a sow. The sow is wearing a hat that is clearly distinguishing it. It's a Jewish hat. So like the pig itself is Jewish, I guess it's meant to show in some way.
Okay.
And then there are Jewish characters, which is to say, like there are humans that are also wearing very clearly recognizable Jewish clothes or a Jewish symbol. So like we know these are Jews, and they are looking at and reaching towards the hindquarters of the pig, which is something that will come up a lot in a bunch of these examples.
What I find really, obviously, aside from upsetting, what I find fascinating is the obscenity aspect in a church, because it's one thing to hate someone and it's another thing to, at least in my mind, defile your holy spaces with obscenity, even if it is obscenity that is meant to target your enemy, let's say. Like I still wouldn't want obscenity in my holy space, regardless of who it was attacking.
Yeah. It's a great point. I did read a little bit about this. The predominant scholar that we're going to talk about a lot today is a Israeli. I believe that his expertise actually is in art history, but Isaiah Shachar, who wrote the book on this. There have been a bunch of other articles, but there's only one full-length book treating this topic, the Judensau. He wrote it in 1974, and it was based on a lot of extremely extensive and careful research that he did going around Germany, cataloging these things, describing them in his book in incredible detail, and also putting them in the context of the time, of both like what art looked like in churches, in these communities, what was the relationship between Christians and Jews in that area of Germany at the time. And like side note, that this is really mostly a German thing. There's some spread to other German-speaking lands, in areas of France or Switzerland, but we find them all over the place in Germany.
Got it.
One of the points in his book, he says, like, to your point, like, yes, this might seem incredibly strange to us to have these sorts of very grotesque images inside a church, but it would not have been at the time, because grotesque imagery was part of the design sometimes of inside of churches to be deliberately evocative, right? Like it's supposed to, I don't know, like shock you or make you think about something in some way. But it does seem very strange to us because a sacred space you would think would not have something so profane in it.
Right. I guess what we consider
I also think that's
profane.
Yeah, that's like us as Jews not being used to graven images in our houses of worship. Right. If you're used to going to a church that has a very gory representation of Jesus on the cross, like that would be, for a number of reasons, that would be very shocking to see in a synagogue. But like one of them being like, we don't usually see like very, very grotesque or even just like very real representations of human things in synagogues.
And very evocative, gory portrayals of Jesus in art is commonplace in certainly pre-modern Christianity.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a totally different way of thinking about your sacred space. And I guess I'm coming to it from a very Jewish lens, and I shouldn't be in this case, but I think that's a good lesson for how we think about things.
Yes, like even if you are used to representations of human things in your sacred space, this still seems like, okay, yeah, it's like pretty gross. And like you're supposed to be looking at it and thinking, wow, that's really gross. And then, next thought, yeah, Jews are pretty gross.
Right.
Like it's not showing the people you would identify with.
Do we know what, I mean, obviously we have the oldest ones that we've found, and we don't know that they're the oldest. They're just the oldest preserved. Like, do we know why this started?
Great question. Right. So great question, where it started from, why it started. Two theories, which probably, I don't know, are connected in some way, but one of them is that there is something called, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation for sure, but Schandbilden, which is some sort of a public condemnation, public representation of something that is its own form of punishment, like some types of offenses, certain types of thievery maybe, or prostitution or other sorts of things, instead of or in addition to a fine or lashes or whatever other punishment you would get. There would be, I don't know, a pamphlet or something put out, or like a picture showing you being embarrassed in some way. And there's an older history there to those, and a pig being part of it. So like when the community is trying to show, hey, this person is like did something particularly egregious, they might be shown riding on a pig, and at some point the riding on a pig backwards, which like either already had an association with the devil or comes to be associated with the devil, but like publicly condemning and vilifying people, there's a connection there with like showing them on a pig. So perhaps Christians wanted to embarrass them, or the local court run by Christians in Germany wanted to embarrass them, showed them in association with this pig, and then it came to just be like, oh, this is just a Jewish thing disconnected from whatever it is that they were.
Well, certainly that's not speculative. Like even if they wanted to say like, oh, the Jews did something, well, the Jews killed Jesus, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not like we need an excuse to show them as criminals.
It's not yes, what you're hitting on is like, this isn't, although we'll get shortly to that and blood libels, but like it's not Jews did something wrong, here's why you should hate them. It's like, we already know we hate Jews, but like let's show you how detestable they are.
It's interesting. Like what you're saying now about the pig and its imagery reminds me in a contemporary way of a rat. Mm-hmm. In particular, if anyone walks around the streets of New York or has grown up in a big city, when a construction site is found to be using non-union labor, some of the unions that maybe would be working on that site hire a big inflatable rat and they blow it up, and there is someone from the union whose job it is to stand with it all day. Mm-hmm. And that is a demonstration to the general public that the person who owns or is doing construction on this building is using non-union labor, and the people who work there are quote unquote rats. And rat is the animal that we use to indict people.
Yes, that's such a great modern parallel to, how we have. So just imagine a giant inflatable rat, and imagine on that giant inflatable rat, if there was a big kippah on its head.
Right.
And that's the effect that you're having.
Understood.
Just like, oh, Jew, disgusting animal.
But even more grotesque and obscene.
The other theory about the origin, and again, probably both of these are true or connected in some way, is that there's a long history in churches of this allegorical cycle of different representations of vices and virtues and different animals standing in for them. And there is a very old style of contrast between ecclesia, which is the church, and synagoga, which is the Jews, showing that the Christians are chosen, that the Jews were originally God's people, but now they've been vanquished or left aside. And there are different animals sometimes that represent those. Sometimes the church is a dragon or a knight on a horse. And there's some history there of perhaps the pig was the animal chosen, for this in some way, or the pig was an animal that in the cycle of different vices was chosen to represent gluttony or just a general disgustingness. And that also led into this motif possibly in some way. But the important thing I think to bring out with either of these origin theories, either that it came from, these public demonstrations or public condemnation of a crime, or this general history of, a polemic between Christians and Jews, is that the Judensau kind of loses that original purpose and loses its place in all of those things, and just becomes just a blanket representation of how gross Jews are. It's not put in a pantheon of different things representing crimes, different things representing virtue. It's just separate from all of that. It's just a standalone Jews are gross thing.
It doesn't need to be placed in the context of the church and its, legion of sins.
Yeah, it doesn't need to. And also it seems like it becomes disconnected from. It's not even about the Jewish law isn't true or is corrupt. It's just a pure symbol of hatred of Jews that no longer even is connected to any sort of justification.
Got it. Or theology, it sounds like.
Right. Has nothing to do with...
You could be a completely lapsed Christian and
it's
still
not about
be engaging
a religious practice. All right, let's take a quick break here, and then we'll come back and talk more about some of the specific examples that we can still see today.
Are you a curious person? Yeah, same here. That's why I love The Portion, a newsletter from our Judaism Unpacked team. It's wicked smart, as the Bostonians say, and it's super relevant. It makes Jewish ideas feel approachable, meaningful, and genuinely relevant for one's everyday life. Whether you've been studying for years or are just starting to ask questions, The Portion is your weekly source of fresh insights to inspire your journey. Follow at Judaism Unpacked on Instagram, and join me and so many others by signing up at unpacked.media/Judaism to get The Portion in your inbox. That's unpacked.media/Judaism. Yalla, let's do this.
I don't want to say that I'm looking forward to hearing specific examples, but I'm curious to hear them. I now very much understand your apprehension at the beginning of this episode. I do think it is important for us to learn about these things.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a couple very famous examples that, again, most troublingly, you can still see today. And this is where I think, like I said at the beginning, it's hard to see the happy ending. These are still there. You can go and see this, and it's still totally visible. And what does that mean? So let's talk about them, and then I think we can get to that conversation. So I mentioned the Brandenburg one, dated to 1230, which is still there. The cathedral in Cologne, that's a very major cathedral. I think it's the most visited landmark in Germany. It's an incredibly important Catholic cathedral. It's huge. It was built over the process of hundreds of years. It's massive. You can go, if this is the thing you want to spend your time on, you can go read the Wikipedia article on the Cologne Cathedral. It is, I will say, aside from this part, it's a gorgeous building. Very, very, very old, very well preserved. Clearly a lot of thought and work went into it. But in the inside of the building, on one of the choir stalls, is one of these Judensau representations, showing a sow, showing the Jews. It's pretty close to, and there's a connection made to what seems to us like a representation of a boy being martyred. It's probably a derivation of the story of Good Werner, which is like a blood libel from around that time and that place, of like this boy who was found killed, and the Christians accused the Jews of doing it. So there's like a connection there between the Judensau and this murder of this boy. But Shachar details like it's both, like we were talking about before, it's very grotesque in its representation and very grotesque also in the boy murder part. And that's like clearly a choice, rather than emphasize the saintliness, of this martyred boy. Like the focus seems very much to be on like the craven, horrific violence of the murderers.
This might be completely delusional on my part and maybe way, way, way too much to ask or even imagine. But in these places, in something like the cathedral in Cologne, which you've now told me is a major tourist attraction in Germany, is there literature or a plaque or a pamphlet that says, hey, by the way, this is bad?
So we'll get there. And I don't know offhand if there's a plaque at the one in Cologne, but that does lead us very nicely into the next example that I want to talk about, which is the church in Wittenberg, Germany, which is maybe familiar to you because it does become famous. The church is built in the 1300s. The Judensau is carved in 1343. But the church in Wittenberg becomes very famous a couple hundred years later, because something very prominent was affixed to its door.
Oh, is that where Luther affixed his
95?
30 plus 65?
30 plus, yeah.
His 95 theses?
Yeah. You knew it. You got it. Yeah.
I just didn't remember how many.
And I will say, and again, like I feel like this has come up many times. Great topic for our imaginary sister podcast, Christian history nerds.
Amazing.
But apparently that story may not be unembellished. Like it might not be totally true and much more legendary that he actually like pinned a list of theses to the door. But Luther definitely was preaching in Wittenberg in the mid 1500s.
I'm not going to lie. I'm a little impressed with myself that I knew even half of what you were referring to. Yeah.
In the Wittenberg church, the Judensau there, which it's a very large pig and a bunch of Jews under it, suckling from its teats, and then one of them lifting up the tail of the pig and looking very intently at the hindquarters, like looking into the hindquarters of the pig. I don't know. We don't need to go there exactly of like what we're talking about, but he's looking inside. And this one is on the outside of the church. It's meant to motivate, like the inflatable rats you were talking about. Like you put them on the street to get people's attention. This is on the outside of the church. This very prominent pig, carved there with Jews. And again, they're very clearly identifiable as Jews because of their dress, because I don't remember if it's in this one, but in a number of them, they're wearing a Jewish badge. Like I was saying, an inflatable rat with like a kippah on its head. The kippah could not be under, or if it had kippah and side curls, let's say, like, that means Jew. Like the Jews are very clearly demarcated as Jews.
But just to take this back to earlier in the season, not necessarily with a Star of David.
Right. No, right. Not with the Star of David. The Star of David is not used to indicate that they're Jews, because it would not be the way that you would that you would distinguish Jews at that time. You know, maybe nowadays, but
maybe that's helpful. Maybe that's helpful to us in that modern people who go to these churches.
Right. You walk by it, you probably don't
even necessarily know
what it is at all. Although there's a plaque explaining it, like to your question
in
from
Wittenberg.
before. Like, yes.
Okay. So, and is that plaque at all
the plaque is like
remorseful?
The plaque is like from the 1960s and says like this is a horrible anti-Semitic representation and like reminder, if you're in Germany, in case you forgot this, that 6 million Jews were killed. And this is very interesting choice of language. 6 million Jews were killed under the sign of the cross, meaning like it ties the Holocaust to, I think, the history of anti-Semitism specifically coming from the church. So Wittenberg, it's originally there in the 1340s. Luther only comes around 200 years later. Luther would be, I think, an interesting topic for a whole episode for us, because he's at the beginning of his career, he starts out sympathetic, maybe even somewhat positive to Jews, but he becomes virulently anti-Semitic as he becomes more prominent and popular. And he specifically, among his books, he has a book called The Jews and Their Lies.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, right? Lovely. And he writes about the Judensau in Wittenberg, which is fascinating also. Of like, he takes that and like unpacks it as like, wow, this is a, really important symbol. There's a lot we can learn from this. Like, Jews didn't make it, my man. Like, this isn't like telling some deep truth in some way.
Right. But I guess if you are someone who has grown up with this imagery, you assume that it has an element of truth to it. You assume it came from somewhere.
Oh, and as you say that, this is going back to, we mentioned the Brandenburg Judensau before. An important point I forgot to mention is that the Brandenburg Judensau, which, is earlier, that was made in 1230. That is hard to reconcile with the fact that we have records that show Jews only really settled in Brandenburg about 100 years later. So like, this was made as a representation of Jews in a place where there weren't even any Jews. Like, it's not about what the Jews here are doing. It's about like, oh yeah, just well known how awful Jews are, even in a place where they don't have any.
I don't know if I take comfort in that in some way. It's obviously horrible. It's horrible to be,
as we've like asked many times this, which is better for people to like hate Jews because of things that they think
that they've actually done,
or they've actually done,
right?
Or like just hate Jews baselessly.
Is it worse to be like the avatar for all evil in the world unfoundedly, or is it worse for there to actually be Jews in the town who have done things or have been accused of doing things that are actually horrible, and that's why the symbolism emerges?
I think that point is like really clear of like, have all Jews always in the history of the world been like completely guilt-free? No, definitely not. Jews have like,
but no one is
on this, but like, does it come anywhere close to justifying the like level of like hate that is represented here by this? Clearly not. Like, there's like, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
That people could come to be so hated. Like that is obviously no longer connected in any way to any people's actions. It's just like this baseless disgust.
This imagery of a pig, it endures. It doesn't evolve into any other animal. It doesn't change depending on where you're living. It's just
interesting. Like, is there like an inflected? There's one paper that's sort of a follow-up to Shachar, and it talks about the Judensau specifically in the regions of Bohemia. But yeah, it endures. We'll come back to talking about Wittenberg, I guess, and Luther in a moment. But it endures. They're pretty popular from the 13th century all the way through the 17th century, and then seem to just decline in popularity. Like, there aren't as many new ones being made, from the 17th century on. Although it does seem to pop up every once in a while, or at least like it is lasting in the public mind in some way of just like, oh, people still know what a Judensau is. There's a different, I think it just says it, it's like Sau Juden or something, which is just the same words in different order. That does come up, that the Nazis use, that like comes up in the time of the Holocaust, but we don't see them I don't know, using a lot of the exact same type of symbolism, but perhaps derivations of it. But going back for a little bit to Wittenberg and Luther, so he writes about this Judensau and has like a whole interpretation for it, and his interpretation of what's going on in the part of the scene specifically that shows a Jew lifting up the tail of the pig and looking into its rear end intently, is that Luther says they're looking, for the Talmud and for their like Jewish secrets there, and for the Shem HaMiforash, like the hidden name, right? Like some sort of like very unutterable name of God that Jews have.
The one that you're just supposed to scan your eyes over.
But after Luther writes this like title is added to this image, like, and again, still there today on the church in Wittenberg is the Judensau, and below it says Rabbini Shem HaMiforash in German, which like probably means like rabbi and like the search for this name of God or something.
But there is like a demonic implication to it, or a nefarious implication.
Whatever it is, yeah, it's definitely nefarious and awful, and like we don't know exactly what it is that he like meant, but it's not good. He meant it pretty hatefully. The fact that it was added was like clearly hate, like here's this 200-year-old sculpture. In case you didn't already realize that it's, Jews and a pig and whatever, let's spell it out now, in some way based on the teachings of Luther. And this is all still there. And that's like the part I want to, I guess, get to as like the third element. Like there's like the history. Where did this come from? What are some examples of it? But like, this is there it's 2025. You can go visit the Cologne Cathedral and see a Judensau carved on the choir stall. You can go visit the church in Wittenberg, which is an incredibly important historical place. And you can see the Judensau. And yeah, there's a little plaque on the floor, near it that says like, this is part of like a history of anti-Semitism. And there's a couple dozen other examples, including one at a church in Kalbe, I think it's called. It's a small town 80 miles away from Berlin that also has one, like a Judensau carved as one of its gargoyles outside the church. And it was badly damaged because it's hundreds of years old. And in the 90s, there was a lot of acid rain and stuff. And like this sculpture was in bad shape. So they took a bunch of the sculptures down to restore them. And the church themselves, like the parish of this church, were like, yeah, don't put that one back up.
Oh, wow. That is not where I thought you were going.
Okay, well, and then they were compelled by the court and by law that they do not have permission to do. Like, this is a historical artifact and they cannot choose to leave it off. It must legally be put back up.
Wow.
It's part of this historic church. So they put it back up, but just like put a covering over it, which if there's somebody out there who, I don't know, tell me the other side of this argument of like why these things need to still be up there in churches, not put in a museum, not part of like, here's the like history and this is important to know, but like this has to be on the outside of your church. Like to me, it seems like, no, it does not need to be. And it should not be.
This is not at all a direct parallel. And there are so many differences. And I want to state this from the outset, but there are those who would argue that it is important that it stay up to understand history and the way in which Jews were portrayed and treated. And maybe we need to learn from that. Yeah. And that's the same argument that a lot of people make with respect to the statues of Confederate generals in the South of the United States in terms of removing them. How do we all at once not honor them? But educate people that they were honored in this place and they were considered prominent people in this place. And that is part of the history of this place. Like to take them down and never mention them is to strip away from certain places in the South an important history that needs to be learned of. The people here did revere this figure.
I try to see things from multiple perspectives, but like, this is not that. This isn't, I'm saying take down a statue of Martin Luther because his track record with anti-Semitism is horrific. Like there's no redeeming quality here. This isn't, a complex historical figure. This is just a pure symbol of hate. That's always been a symbol of hate that like And I'm not saying wipe them out completely, like put them in a museum, but like, why is it on a church? How do you like reconcile like, okay, yeah, like we're like, this is like still here as part of the church.
Right. And like, we're going to have this here with our manger, which is, celebrating an important foundational aspect of our religion. And this is just going to be alongside it because it's also an important foundational aspect of our religion.
Yeah. And this is, I don't know, maybe this is like overthinking or extending like an American way of looking at things, but like episodes of TV shows that are like no longer streamed. If you're following the whole, like Nathan Fielder now, there's a whole thing with it, which actually involves, interestingly, the Holocaust in Germany. But there are even episodes of TV shows made more recently, like 30 Rock.
30 Rock,
an episode that's like not
episodes.
Even 15 years old, right? That like showed blackface, and we recognize now, like, yeah, that's just like not a sensitive, portrayal of something, and it's not.
And it was also showing blackface to make fun of it. Blackface.
Yeah,
blackface.
Right? But it's not like available. I don't know. You can see some like Disney movies, but there'll be a disclaimer like, hey, these representations were from their time, whatever. Like those things are taken down or given context. And like, to me, so mind-boggling,
right?
That like you can just walk up to the Cologne cathedral and see this. You can walk up to the church in Wittenberg, and again, there's like a small plaque, but like just take it off the wall. Just take it down.
Do we know why these things started to go out of vogue in the 17th century?
I don't know exactly. I think they were replaced by other forms of anti-Semitism also. Like, let's not pretend like the German anti-Semitism ended in the 17th century. Yeah. And like, maybe it was no longer in fashion to have such grotesque art. Like, art becomes
like, we just didn't want to see it because it was visceral and
make
ugly.
New ones. Again, make new ones, because like a lot of them are still, left there. There is, to the Wittenberg point, in addition to the Colby story, there is a guy in Wittenberg. You can Google this. You can find a number of articles, who is like mounting a one-man political campaign to like have this taken down. It's gone through several levels of German courts, and he so far, I think, has not won his case. But I don't, like, if ever I was going to advocate for something political, something that like listeners can do beyond, just listen to this episode and become more educated, like, I don't know, maybe start a letter writing campaign, or I haven't done this, but like do one of these petitions that people can sign of just like, this, like, take this Judensau on the church in Wittenberg down and put it in a museum. I'm not even saying take it down and throw it out. Take it down and put it in a museum and put it in a proper context, and like, yes, let it be a part of history, but let it be a part of history, not let it be a part of like a church that is still presently a church.
Got it. I'm very now hesitant to look at these symbols after we wrap up, because I do, from an intellectual perspective, want to see what they look like, but I'm also very hesitant to experience what it feels like to see them and to know that they are still out there.
I'll say, to allay some of your hesitations, a lot of them, like I said, have like been badly weathered, or like have not survived so well the 600 to 800 years of history. So they often do need a caption explaining to you what it is that you're looking at, because it would not be immediately clear.
So I think it's interesting to me that this, even though they may have gone out of fashion in terms of being in these public places, like, we definitely do see Jew as pig persist as anti-Semitic imagery.
Yes.
The most recent thing that I've thought of is, I think it was last year, the musician Roger Waters had some sort of pig hanging in one of his concerts with an image of Anne Frank on it, or it said the words Anne Frank on it. But he's obviously still using it. I'm sure there are plenty, like, certainly Jew pig is not gone as an anti-Semitic epithet. Yeah,
and it's like, which has a number of elements. And I think this is, like we said at the beginning, we're close to the end here of this season on objects and symbols. And I think it's given me a newfound appreciation for how much visual culture like shapes how we think about things. Like, we don't often think about things in representations and symbols. We don't often, think of something and then think about a paragraph of text explaining it, but like, we have quick visual images for them. And like, if your visual image of a Jew is a Jew pig. There's so much that becomes part of that. And like the endurance of these symbols is problematic in that way too, of just like, what does that mean that for hundreds of years, little Christian kids who would come to church every Sunday would just constantly be seeing this image of the association between Jew and pig, which like tells you that they're not human, they're disgusting, they do disgusting things, especially if you don't actually know any Jews.
And we see the obviously very painful, very horrific end results of that centuries-long dehumanization.
Yeah. So like I said, there's no happy note to end on here. There's no resolution yet. I don't know. Like it would be nice if we move towards one, but just like a deeply, deeply troubling history that does, I don't know, shine a light on a lot of things.
And I think, as we wrap up this season, it is in a lot of ways good that we covered a symbol like this because, for better or worse, we don't make our own material history. Like we've covered a lot of things that were made by Jews, made for Jews, were made to symbolize Jews, like the Star of David or the menorah or, the paintings in the Dura Europos synagogue that are supposed to be the things that we remember when we think about Jews. But at the end of the day, we are not the only ones who make our mark on the world. Like what other people think of us is just as out there as what we think of ourselves. And so for better or worse, this is a Jewish symbol. Jewish History Nerds is a production of Unpacked, an open door media brand. Subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast and follow Unpacked on all the regular social media channels. Just search for @UnpackedMedia.
And if you're enjoying nerding out with us, please share this and other episodes with your friends and family. And most of all, be in touch with us by writing to us at nerds@unpacked.media. That's nerds@unpacked.media.
Jewish History Nerds is produced by Jenny Falcon and Rifki Stern. Dr. Henry Abramson is our education lead. It's edited by Rob Pera. I'm Yael Steiner.
And I'm Jonathan Schwab. Thanks for listening.